awkward silence. Gotta love it. Am I on? Can everybody hear me? Good, good. All right, good. I'm glad to be with you guys again tonight. We've over the past several months, we've got to be together quite often on Wednesday nights, at least once a month. So I want to thank Pastor Jimmy for that. I guess we're doing an okay job, so he keeps asking me to come back and continue this study through Genesis. Chapter 1, I was going to do this anyways. This is what I was going to say to start tonight, that this, back in October, was a study that I was going to do for myself for 2026. I was going to dive back into creation and try to find some nuance stuff about it. And I'm always studying on it. I'm always reading about it. I'm always watching videos on it. So like when Pastor Jimmy asked me to come in October and give a Wednesday night message, I thought what better way to kind of invite everybody along into my study with me. We started a little early. We're going to finish up probably before October's over with, but I'm going to stretch it out a little bit so that we can end in October, right? I said 1 year study, so we're going to do 12 months. We're not going to cut it short. Chris Legg said that I have 8 hours on this thing, so I'm going to take half of that tonight. But not really. We're going to be on day 3, so we finally made it. Let's all give a round of applause for that. We are at the halfway point of the 6 days of creation, but we're not done. Like I said, we started in October, so Pastor Jimmy gave me a couple extra months right there to go beyond the 6 days. I was going to finish up on day 6, touch on day 7, and then we were going to be done with our study, but we got some extra months ahead of us, so we're going to go on past day 6, go through day 7, and then I think we're going to kind of go through some, maybe some genealogy up to the flood, and then we might finish with the flood and do some fun little studies on it, hopefully maybe some nuanced stuff for the flood. So let's take a minute or two real quickly and let's kind of recap. And while I'm doing that, let's turn, if you have your Bibles tonight, your devices, your iPads, whatever you got, I don't care, I use my phone. Turn to Genesis chapter 1, and we will be starting in verse 9. So we'll have verse 9. I think they're going to put it here in the English Standard. I am reading from the common I think it's called the Common Christian Standard, but yeah, we'll be having it displayed in the English Standard, so they're kind of similar. So let's recap to where we're at currently before we get into day 3, real quickly. So we started this in October, like I said, and October was all about, and if you weren't here, go back and listen to that. I encourage you to do so. We started out, the lesson was called Foundations, and we basically talked about that beautiful first line in our Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so we won't recap on that, but we talked about that's a trinity of trinities. It's a continuum, and God really started all things the way it should have been done, right? It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't over millions of years, and it wasn't by chance. Plain and simple. It was for a purpose. It was done orderly, done mathematically, and it was done honestly. If you just look at it through a common sense set of glasses, it was done with common sense. Time, space, and matter all come to existence right then and there. So we looked at that. We kind of dug a little deep through that study, and we kind of showed that we do indeed have a different set of glasses on than what you generally hear out of textbooks and science videos and you know, universities today. We do combat evolution on a very profound level. Okay, and I want to talk about that just for a second. So over the last several months, since October, you've heard me really talk about this creation versus evolution kind of thing, almost like it's a grudge match, right? And I don't want it to seem that way at all. But today, this is free. This wasn't a part of my lesson tonight. But today, me and Nicole went to Tays Valley Christian to tour it and meet some of the staff. Sutton will be going to school starting in not next year, but year after. He'll start his middle school year there, and we had asked to come over and visit with the principal there and some of the administration, and then take a tour of the school. And while we were there, the Jody, he's the, what is he, Nicole? He's a administrator. There you go. He's the administrator there, and Jody was giving his little presentation, and he told us the story about how the school was founded. And if you've went there, had kids gone there, I'm sure you've heard the story, but back in, I believe it was 79, Dave, was it 78, 79, the school was founded in that time frame. There was a young man that went to college to become get his doctorate's degree in science, and while he was at college, obviously we all know what he was taught through those studies, and he became an atheist. He had a real hard time trying to fit science, what he was learning in university, with what he learned in church, okay? And he had a real hard time with that. And so as he continued to learn in college and study, he decided that he'd come to the determination that there is no God and evolution is the right way to go, and science overrules any faith-based understanding. And he became an atheist. And this young man was not only an atheist, he was the poster child for atheism. He was standing on university street corners with "there's a no God" sign, blah, 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 okay, like we see today. Well, then he, at some point in his life, had a profound come to Jesus moment. And Jody over at Tays Valley Christian didn't elaborate on why or how, but he ended up, Jesus meeting him where he was at, and he finally gave his life to the Lord. And when he done so, he came back to the small church there in Tays Valley and founded Tays Valley Christian School, okay? So that's a success story that sometimes we don't get to hear that often. When we're talking about this evolutionary science understanding versus what we teach here in our churches. All right, so this battle is raging on. That could have been a soul that would have been lost forever. Thank the Lord that he's still in the business of saving. But that is why this subject is so important, I believe. And I hate standing up here and acting like it's a UFC match between us and secular science, but it really is important. And we really need this teaching daily. I really believe we need to continue to educate ourselves as much as we possibly can on this subject. So that's why it's so important when I did, back in October, the lesson called Foundations. In the beginning, God truly did create the heavens and the earth. And that truth, we don't have to try to fit science in the Bible. The Bible is science. And that's what we're trying to do over the course of the next year, is show myself and you guys that the teaching of the science and the teaching of the Bible go hand in hand. It really does, once you start to dig deep into it. And we don't have to lose souls. We don't have to lose souls to education. We don't, okay? All right, so onward. On December 3rd, Wednesday night, we taught the gap theory. We won't go through that entirely, but we showed that it's not only outside the church walls, but there's instances now that inside the church we find that evolution has creeped in and taken a stronghold, and the gap theory is one of those. I wish I had more time to teach on that again, but I don't. So please go and get that soundbite and listen to it. On January 14th, Wednesday night, we finally made it to day one. And then on day one, we were in the latter half of day one where God created light, and then he separated the light from the darkness. And then we kind of talked about what light was, and I hope that wasn't boring. I hope you guys enjoyed that a little bit. And we kind of pondered, I did, as I said on that day, how God actually pulled light from darkness and separated those two entities. It's mind-blowing. It will blow my mind for the rest of my life how he does it. We'll talk a little bit more about something else like that today. Wednesday night, February 18th, we talked about when we finally made it to day 2, and we talked about how God then separated water that was surrounding the crust and core of the earth, and then separated that water and put water in the atmosphere and in the sky and made our atmosphere. And then we talked about different layers of atmosphere and how it's important and how it gives us, basically our foundation to life. This is a starting point to eventually life forming on earth and sustaining life. And we talked about how our atmospheres are made up of nitrogen and oxygen and water vapor, and how we have evaporation and condensation and precipitation, and we have all these things that go on, and God created all that in that day. One day, 24-hour cycle. Amazing. If you can't worship God in that, what can we worship God in? You know, it's just amazing. And we talked about how in that one day and 24 hours, He made breathable air. He protected us from harmful solar radiation by, the different layers of atmosphere. He sustained our temperatures in that day, and He created moisture or rain or however, dew, probably for the most part at that time. So we were sustained, or we could be sustained eventually. So that brings us down to day 3. So what is God going to do for us on this day, right? So if you look at it, like I said, we got a different story than what you would find in evolution, correct? Now you see a very stark pattern starting to happen, and it's moving toward an end goal. He creates time, space, and matter. Matter was without form. He covers it with water. He separates light from darkness. And then He gets down to where He begins to build a sustainable atmospheric situation on earth. These are mathematically precise steps. See what I'm saying? Now, if we look on the other side of the table, none of that is calculated. You got an evolution that it starts in chaos, and it's still going chaotically if you look at it through their worldview. So we know, and this is where the common sense comes in. I can get off on this all day, and I'll try not to. We'll get to the lesson, I promise. But we know if we build an automobile that there's a lot of thought and prep work that goes into that. Right, Park? Brandon, you guys deal with this every day. Simple, right? So planning goes on, and sometimes planning, I'm sure, goes on for months and months and months and months. Okay, then you get engineers involved, and those engineers start to begin to devise a plan. And these plans are going through electrical and mechanical, and I couldn't imagine what else goes into this, right? Got it? And then it goes into the prep phase where you're now building parts, and all those parts have to be taken to a factory. And then the assembly team starts to build that automobile, transmission. And then it goes to the testing phases, right? So we're testing the engines on dynos, and we're testing transmissions, and we'll test the whole car. We test the safety ratings, and it's tested extensively before it ever reaches the sell lot, okay, the car dealership. And we do that with everything we know, everything. This computer is done about the same way. This cell phone's done about the same way. A painting on the wall is done about the same thing. We know once we see something that's been designed, it has to have a designer. But listen to me. This is how chaotic this is. This is how big of a mess this is. If you look at it with another set of glasses, the evolutionary set of glasses, it states this. They say that without any material or prep work, any thought or design, nothing exploded into something. I can understand if they said, well, if you were going to build a car this way, you throw all the parts out in the front yard, light a grenade, throw it out there, shut the door, it explodes, you come back out, and oh, there's your F-150. I can understand that a little bit more than we would light a grenade in thin air, and then all of a sudden all the parts assembled and made, and you know what I mean? And then your F-150 comes. It's that mind-boggling. I don't understand it. So there is absolutely no order or design to their theory. And if you look at ours right now and God's design, you see that everything has been thought out in steps up to this point. Now we're at the halfway point. So we've got an atmosphere, we've got an ocean surrounding a core, a crust, we've got all the building blocks, we've got light for the next step. And this is where we find ourselves at today. So let's look at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 9. So one thing about day 3 is pretty interesting. There's 2 creation parts in one day. It's pretty unique. So we're going to read the first half of day 3, and then we'll go to the second half a little later, okay? So let's start at verse 9. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky come together into one place, that the dry land can appear." And that's what happened. God named the dry land earth, and he named the gathered waters sea. God saw that it was good. All right, let's stop right there, verse 10. All right, so pretty simple language. Moses writes this pretty simply, I think, but it's a lot more going on than what we see. So first of all, we all know that water has covered the entire planet, right? And we actually have water that's covering the entire planet, and then we have water in our atmosphere. God separates those 2 bodies, okay? And we'll get into some theories of that later on in our study in a few months. But right now, we know that water. Anybody ever seen the movie Waterworld? I think, was Kevin Costner in that movie? Is anybody? Yeah. I used to love that movie when I was little. So we knew, if you watch that movie, you know that it's very difficult to live in a planet that's covered 100% with water. And God knew that, obviously, so that wasn't going to be ideal. So he was going to have to move water away and try to bring dry land at some point in time. So it sounds simple, but if you've ever been in the ocean on a cruise ship or a fishing excursion, and you've been off land for a few miles where you can't see no more land, you realize the vastness in a small slither of probably a few 400 or 500 miles, a small sliver of that portion, that's visible portion of ocean, it seems huge. I couldn't imagine, the earth is primarily covered with water, so I couldn't imagine what force it is at play here. What kind of force God is using. He's bringing up soil. I think I spit. He's bringing up soil and moving water. It really is amazing. This is another cool little section. Is that this is when the earth began to really take shape, right? Before that, water forms to whatever it wants to form to. And we know this planet was formless at one time. And even with water on it, any type of gravitational pull, this earth is just, it would seem like it was just bubbling around in the vastness of space. We don't really have any structure to it. Even though that we have an atmosphere, that atmosphere is basically the only structure you would probably be able to see visibly. So we've got still yet a formless earth. And now this is the moment when God is giving shape to this planet for the first time. And I can only imagine seeing that from afar as mountain ranges begin to lift. There is a debate against creation scientists if God actually subdued water or put water into the mantle of the earth, and then the water levels dropped, and then dry land. These guys get into it deep. Dry land appeared, or God actually pulled the dry land and then the waters moved. And it's kind of a little bit of debate. I read both sides of the theory, but one thing we know for sure is this is when mountain ranges was formed. We know rivers are formed because later on in the garden we have the river of Euphrates. There's 3 different rivers named. We'll look at those later. But we know rivers are being formed, beaches are being formed now. All these things are happening in this one instance. One of the things that we do need to kind of look at, that it is a theory and a debate, is if we have multiple continents at this time or a single continent, which sometimes we don't think about, but. So I'll give you Harlan's theory, and I don't share this. I didn't come up with this on my own, but I do believe and with some other creation scientists, that we only have one continent at this time. And it probably wasn't that big. It really didn't need to be. And I'm not saying it wasn't that big. It wasn't the size of, Honolulu, Hawaii, but, something the size of North America or the continent of Africa would have been suffice with the amount of people between when Adam's created and the flood. We kind of got a rough estimate of how many people would have been here. But some individuals think that it could have been multiple continents. And the reason why they say that is if you've ever looked at a map or a globe, you will know that most continents seem like they fit together pretty well, right? If you lower the ocean water about, I think it's about 57 feet, then you actually get to see our continental shelf. Most continents have a very shallow shelf of ocean water before it drops off to thousands of feet or hundreds of feet, right? So we know that a lot of that was visible because we can still find cities down in there. They always say the lost city of Atlantis, right? But there is lost cities on those continental shelves. We know that the water level would have decreased significantly after the flood, and a lot of that was inhabited. And over time, the ocean has actually risen and taken over some of our land. But if you take that continental shelf and you really start to put Africa against North America and South America and bring in parts of Australia, all those continents fit pretty well together. So the theory is that God would have had all of those, and then the flood would have broke that up. We know that the fountains of the deep broke open, and we know that for the most part, that's probably where we get our tectonic plate cracks and fractures from. And that's why our crust is still moving today. If you live in California for 10 minutes, you'll find the evidence of that. They have, I think, an earthquake every 27 seconds or something, as their plates are shifting back and forth. So we get that from the global flood. And so we noticed that some of those fit together. Probably during the flood, they split apart. That's a pretty good theory. I don't know if that's true. I would say with how you look at landmass and mountain ranges and how they're twisted together and they're protruded up, and you can see rock that has formed in layers that has actually looked like a U-shape. You've seen that if you go up in the mountains where they've cut roads in through like Pocahontas County, Greenbrier County, and you see the waves in the rock layer. We know during the flood all of that was created, those pressures of the mantle being and the crust being cracked apart, and it's still shifting. So we kind of get an idea that all the continents were together at one time in some form or another. But that's the way I see it. So we get an indication of that as it says that God moved the waters into, what does the language state, one place. Okay, does that make sense? That's all I can say about moving water and making dry land. It's some interesting things to think about as God began to give us a place to where we can, ultimately live. Another thing I want to point out before we move on, an interesting fact, is that God commanded the waters to gather into one place. If He made the waters, He still commands the waters, and He will command the waters forever. We can see time after time He commanded the waters, when He calmed the storm and the waters calmed. I mean, He has dominion over that. If we look, he gets to walk on water. Man, I'd love to be able to walk on water. But He makes the water. Jesus still walking on the water. You see what I'm saying? He gives power to Moses to be able to part the water. God makes the water. He commands it to move away from dry land. He does what He wants with it. It's just amazing to know the power of H2O and realize that He is above that power. It's just amazing. Unbelievable. All right, let's go on. So let's get back to, we'll start in verse 11 now. And then here's creation event number 2 for this 24-hour cycle. God said, "Let the earth grow plant life, plant yielding seeds, and fruit trees bearing fruit with seeds inside it. each according to its kind, throughout the earth. And that's what happened. The earth produced plant life, plant yielding seeds, and each according to its kind, and tree bearing fruits with seeds inside it, each according to its kind. God saw that it was good. There was evening, there was morning, and we have made it through the third day. Congratulations, everybody. We're over halfway through this study. All right. Like I said, this day is very unique. So we've got 2 creation events in one day. Listen, God made dry land and all the plants in one 24-hour cycle. Pastor Jeff always said, if that don't fire you up, your wood's wet. So if that doesn't make you excited about something, it does me. It really begins to define who God truly is and what He can do. Yeah. So you remember in day 2, I said something when we finished. God didn't say it was good, right? Y'all remember that? So if you go back and read day 2, God said, Moses writes that it was evening and morning and it was the second day, but there was no good to it yet. God did not state that that day was good. The only day He says that, He doesn't say that on, is day 2. And I believe He was busy working through day 2 and the hour struck midnight, and on day 1 He was like, all right, let's go ahead and start making dry land. He wasn't done yet. It was a 48-hour cycle for God. So it feels like He has not even taken a breath. He's right back to work. So He separates and gets that dry land ready, and then it was almost like, ooh, I'm too excited. I can't end here, right? Let's put some plants on this dry land. One of the things that we have to realize is sin hasn't entered the world yet, so soil, ocean water, atmospheric pressure is not corrupt. So it's perfect. So as soon as that dry land's coming up, I can imagine it's just a few hours later, He starts seeding it, starts pouring seed into it, and trees start sprouting up. We know that the fruit trees were matured already because it says it's already bearing fruit. It's got the seed in it. It's ready. It's mature. It's ready to fertilize, ready to drop seed and move on to a new tree. Ecosystems are beginning to begin. So God is now not only, He don't stop and say, all right, we'll go on to day 4 before we put anything on this dirt. The dirt's ready to go. Okay? The dirt is ready to go. It's like God does this to our life, right? So He says, man, there's a lot of good soil out there. Get throwing some seed out on it. He don't ever say, hey, rest for a little bit after you become a Christian. Take you about 10 years off, and then you can go and start going to work on this good dirt. I mean, it's quick. He says, get to work. Go proclaim the good news. Sow that seed. He does a great example here. He begins to sow seed as soon as that land comes up out of the water, and it's ready it's ready to produce fruit. So here's a couple interesting things with day 3. We know day 3 now has dry land and grass, herbs, and fruit trees all appear. We see that. We know it shows that life is starting with, life is beginning to start to sustain, okay, something. We don't know what it is yet. We'll have to wait till day 5 and 6 to figure that out. But it is the next step, right, to somehow sustaining something, okay? God did not just create plants. He made them able to reproduce, as we were talking about. They were mature. We know that because now they were producing after its own kind. God built the first sustainable ecosystem. And one of the fun things about this ecosystem, even though it seems like it is vulnerable from time to time, He built it to last. Obviously, we still see it today. In a little bit different version, I think, after the flood, but it's lasting. It lasted through all that, and it'll last until God comes back. So what God builds sustains until He does a different work with it. So we see that. That's fun. Fruit trees were created mature. Like I said, not seedlings. Everything was ready and sustainable immediately. Kind of like what God kind of knew. It's kind of like God knew that something else was needing this eventually, right? Like I said, nothing was out of order. Everything was orderly. Here's 3 interesting things. Why is day 3 so important? First of all, plants provide food, oxygen, and an ecosystem. Let's talk about the ecosystem, why it's important real quick. Why do we need plants? And it's just not plants. Like we think about just grass and trees, right? But you got to imagine, there's fungus, like mushrooms that have, I memean, if you really want to get deep into plants, go to mushrooms. They have a lot of benefit for this planet. But you look at plankton, different sea plants. It's a lot. When you look at plants, it's a lot out there. But we know that we need those ecosystems to balance a lot of things. And one of the things that it balances the most is it balances the way our weather patterns shift. So we lose a certain amount of rainforest in South America every year, and it's a pretty large amount of rainforest. And we can now catalog back all the way to the 50s when they really started doing logging in that area. And we have seen that the weather pattern, not only for the continent or for that region, but the weather pattern out of Africa and over in China has changed through the equator. Less rainfall, or sometimes more rainfall. So we know the ecosystem, because of its nature of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and oxygen balancing, that it sustains a lot of our weather patterns. I think a lot of times if we really do the research, one of the reasons why our weather patterns is really becoming more chaotic is because we are losing a lot of our plants, our trees on this earth. And I think that's just inevitable as we populate it. Number 2, oxygen alone. Here's a pretty interesting fact. Oceanic plants, photosynthesizers, one in particular, the photoplankton, produce 50% of the world's oxygen. So 50% of the world's oxygen comes from oceanic plants, not land plants. I didn't know that until I started studying this. So oceanic plants produce 50% of our oxygen. It probably was even higher at this time, pre-flood. We know oxygen levels were higher, but pre-flood, but it was even higher at this time. So it would have probably produced 60 or 70%. Does everybody agree that, we need that? We need that to sustain life? Thank the Lord for it. Land plants contribute around 28% oxygen. Most oxygen comes from, like we said, oceanic plants. Okay? So God didn't only create the land plants, but He also created plants that live in the ocean. If you ever like the bass fish, especially early in the spring as the grass beds are starting to come up beside the river banks, it's a good time to throw a little buzz bait or something over in there. And then some people say, why does fish like to congregate around those grass beds? Well, one of the reasons for that is that there's higher oxygen rate in that area of water than it would be deeper. So the fish come in there to absorb that oxygen, to breathe more oxygen. The plant is actually oxygenating that small body of water. There's many factors to it, but that's one of them. Number 3, this one's one that we need to spend some time on. Food. Now, pre-flood, we were all vegetarians. Now, there are some debate against that when it comes after Adam sinned. But we know without a shadow of a doubt, before Adam sinned, there was no death on earth, correct? God clearly states that. So therefore, there would be no killing of animals. Either we killing animals for food or animals killing themselves for food, or killing each other for food. That would not have happened. So we will be, here in a few days, be created to have a plant-based diet. Now, I looked up. I am not, I will say this right now, I am not an advocate for being a vegetarian at all. I think that in our plant-based food society today, our plants don't carry the same nutrition value that they would have then, okay? and we can talk about that at a later date. But when God created these plants on day 3, I believe he created them with the right caloric intake, protein intake, vitamin D intake, vitamin K intake, all the building blocks that it takes to sustain us and the animals that were coming before us, okay? So I believe when God tells us to eat the fruit of the trees and the seeds and all that it's in it, I believe 100% that those were designed to sustain us 100%. Now, here's where we can get into some interesting things. We know that our animal life was so much bigger once created on day 5, right? We know that because of our fossil record. We have dinosaurs, right? Could you imagine trying to sustain a 3-ton Tyrannosaurus Rex with just plants? I mean, those might have to be some high potent plants. But he was. That animal was a vegetarian before pre-flood. So these plants would have had to have the right nutritional value to sustain him. We do know that giants did live on the land. And we believe, I say we, but it is a creation science theory that all humans were probably around 13 to 16 foot tall. Okay? There is a pinky bone that has been found on Mount Ararat. They call it Noah's wife's pinky. We don't know that for sure. But the pinky bone, I don't remember exactly how long it was. I think it was 8.5 inches. So if you calculate that to height, that was 14 feet 2 inches tall or whatever. So I believe pre-flood, us humans were a lot larger than what we are today. I know we're not evolving in any way, we're devolving. So I believe that we were smarter, stronger, faster, and healthier pre-flood than we are now, especially pre-sin. You see what I'm saying? Because when Adam was made, he was made what? Perfect. When Eve was made, she was made perfect. So I think we were bigger, stronger, faster. If they'd look at us, if one of them could come back through time and look at us today, they would think we're just puny little ants. They were bigger, stronger, and faster. So the food supply, the plant supply would have had to have had the nutritional value to sustain us in a way that we don't see today. So I'm not up here advocating for not being a vegetarian. If you are one, I'm just not advocating for it. But in this day and time, they knew no different. Okay? So we know today that we have around 30,000 plant species that are edible worldwide. Okay? And I believe that it could have been higher or lower during creation time or pre-flood time. I'm not sure. But I know today we have 30,000 different plant species that are edible worldwide. A fun fact, when I was looking up this and studying on, I really studied the nutritional value of different plants. But the Royal Botanical Gardens documents around 7,000 edible species of plants in their botanical gardens. So, I mean, if worst comes to worst and we can't eat meat no more, then there is enough plants to sustain, I think, continuously sustain life today. But Adam and Eve would have definitely, and their families would have definitely had a lot more or a lot better quality of plant. And God knew this. So as soon as dry lands appears, he puts plants on them. It's another step in our journey to human life. And day 3, I think it's really fitting. God's a God of impossible math. Me and Nicole says that all the time. We got that from Dallas Jenkins, the creator of the Chosen. But God is a God of impossible math. God, I think he just made it right here. We're on hump day, right? On the 3rd day, we're on that Wednesday day. And he was like, all right, dry land plants, now you got somewhere to stay and somewhere to eat. You got something to sustain you and something to keep you on the 3rd day. And I think it's pretty neat. So with that, we'll close out in prayer, and we'll get ready for day 4, because day 4, now we start to get our, it's no more lights that we are unaware of. We're going to find out where our light starts to come from after this on day 4. And then we'll get to look at some really cool, we're going to leave Earth and go to space for a little bit one day on